So today we're going to talk about the process of taking some flat glass and slumping it to make a duplicate lamp panel. And there's about, well, there's probably more, but there's 3 different varieties of glass molds that we're going to discuss. And for the beginning one, we're going to talk about a powder mold, one that you don't have to add water or anything. So the first thing we're just kind of get it taken care of is to cut a blank. So we're going to make a pattern off the original piece of bent glass. So I put some two-faced tape on the glass and stuck the newspaper. If you like a thicker paper, you can use a heavier craft paper. So sometimes the tape comes off with the paper, sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes the pattern is sensitive as far as what side is up and what side's down. So we're going to put the top, and I like to put the grain direction of the opalescent on, as well as like maybe a brief description, light amber, opal, and that it's a granite back, a rough texture. So, yeah. So this is, going to take this tape off. We're going to have to take this tape off because this is going to be an issue later. So, this looks a little darker. Sometimes the color changes a little in the kiln. So, but we're just going to go with this color here. It was handy. If there's a straight edge. Now, one thing to bear in mind, if the pattern was taken over the top of the glass, you'll actually want to subtract about 1/8 of an inch at the bottom to compensate for the fact that it draped over the top of the bent piece of glass. So that way you won't have to grind it down to fit later. Okay. So we'll just this is Kokomo glass that we're using, and I'm sure anybody's cut it before, you know that it takes quite a bit of pressure to ensure you've got a good score. So we're just going to make one of these. So there's our blank. So the next step, we're going to take a piece of metal that's close to the contour of this and make sure that the front end and the back end are hitting the metal. So, because with a powder mold, if the glass isn't touching the metal and you go to put your blank on the powder, it'll just sink down. So this way, there's support front and back. It will just kind of have some guidelines. They're going to get covered up. Probably a good idea to put on a mask while you're sifting. This powder, it's not that problematic for your lungs, but it is still dusty. It's primarily calcium carbonate and a product that is similar to powdered fire brick. So, in this case, you're better off making sure you have plenty on there so there's no voids. Okay. So, well, it's a little late now, but when if you decide to do a mold like this, make sure that the glass on the front side is free from any grease or anything sticky, because that will pick up the powder, and when you peel the glass off, it's going to take it with it. So, every time you do this, it's going to be a little different. But basically, what we have here, even though there's this little bit of fissuring, this is plenty good enough for the process of taking this flat piece of glass, setting it over this, sticking it in the kiln, and heating it up. Something like this will probably slump at, I don't know, probably 11 1/4, so 1125 Fahrenheit. I always suggest that people take their glass blank and just smooth off the edges so it's not sharp. And then at that point, clean the glass thoroughly and then put it on the powdered mold, and then stick it in the kiln. Take a, like a silicone carbide glass grinding belt. give it a shot of glass cleaner, and then try to keep your fingerprints off the, for sure, the front surface, the smooth side. One thing you'll want to avoid is using some glass, like antique glass that's probably, I don't know, 80 or 100 years old, because if you use old glass for whatever reason, it devitrifies in the kiln, and you'll end up going through all this work firing the glass and taking it out, and it'll all be devitrified, which means it's going to be all chalky, scummy, and sandy on the surface. So you'll need glass that's, I'm not sure where the cutoff point is, but I think I've successfully used glass that's maybe 50 years old, but anything older than that, I'd maybe take a sample piece and do a test. So there it is. So we're ready to load it in the kiln. Okay, so sometimes it's easier to put the glass in, or rather on the mold in the kiln rather than prior, but we're going to, there it is. So if you want, you could possibly take a level and try to get it close to level so that when it falls and slumps down into the powder, and the powder actually will support the glass just fine, it'll fall almost perfectly. So close it up, and we've got a program where this will fire at about up to 1125 with a ramp rate of 500 degrees per hour, and then I just shut it off. There's no fusing or any additional pieces of glass being fused or connected, so a lot of folks think that you have to anneal it. We could put an annealing stage in for an hour or so. That's not a bad thing. But years ago, when they bent panels like this, they did them with torches and they just put the glass in a box with some asbestos and called it a day. So out of the 50 or so years of bending these panels, I've never had one come back cracked. So whatever I'm doing, I think it's working. So got the program ready, and so we'll see how it goes. So we're going to work on a different kind of mold today, a glass slumping mold that's going to be made out of ceramic fiber. And this comes either wet or dry. And this blanket material, I have a piece here. It's actually pre-moistened with like some kind of a mold hardening device, or liquid rather. So this is just a random piece I had. So this is the piece we're trying to duplicate, and with a ceramic fiber, you'll want excess around the blank. So I'm just going to put some kind of scribe lines here, and we'll trim this back. So this stuff, this material here, it actually does dry out your hands, and you'd probably, I should have already had these on, but it's not a bad idea to put on some gloves to keep your hands off of the agent that's in it. Okay, so a critical factor is to keep the glass from sticking to this, because it will. So we're going to take, you could take soap, you could take liquid soap, oil, Murphy's oil soap. For today, I'm going to take something, going to use like a product that's similar to Vaseline and coat the glass. Okay. So this surface, you can kind of smooth this out if you'd like, so that when the mold is dry, it's smoother and the glass will have a nicer look. Just so you know, I always slump down into the mold. I don't, rarely, if ever, do I slump over the mold. I slump in. The face of the glass, since it's on the mold, you'd think it was going to get distorted, but actually it looks just fine. So slumping over, you need a lot more heat and you have more problems. So you can just take it and kind of work it. If you have a panel or whatever project where there's a really radical bend, you'll have to work on maybe using some wire or something to pull it in tighter. Years ago, when I used to use more of this product, I would pretty much cut it really pretty close here and here, and I'd run some tape and tape it to the glass. And that's one way of doing it, but for the most part, this product, it's great because it's a quick way to make a mold. It's more expensive than the powder mold or the plaster film mold that we'll go over later. But so since it's wet, we'll have to set this up and put a fan on it. And believe it or not, it's going to take about a day for this to dry. So we've got our mold, it's dry, it's hard, and we can take it and pull it. It'll come right off because it was covered with grease or Vaseline. And the only thing about this mold that we have to adjust before we put a release on this, so that the glass blank won't stick to this in the kiln, is there's a little bit of a ridge that's developed because we pushed the wet blanket down over the glass. So we've got a little bit of a ridge here, and that we have to sand down. And this material, this ceramic fiber, is not anything you want to breathe the dust of. So I suggest taking it outside and using like a 60 grit or 100 grit paper and gently getting rid of the ridge before we put our release on it. So we've got our dry mold. We sanded the bulk of the ridge off, and there's two things you could do now. You could put another coat of the fiber hardener on and let that cure so it's a little harder, or you could just put the release on. If you were going to make like a lot of these, I would suggest putting the hardener on after you sanded it. But if you're just going to make one or two of these replacements, you wouldn't have to go to that trouble. So what I typically use, which isn't something that's real common, is it's a ceramic slip, and it's thicker than kiln wash. It fills in a lot of the voids. Some folks, there's quite a few, artisans that use this. I don't get too carried away with sanding it because of the fiber dust and everything, but if you use, like I said, this is a ceramic slip. It's a called Albany slip, I believe. You might not find that exact product, but something similar is available. And then once again, this needs to dry, and at that point, once it's dry, we'll clean our blank off and get the Vaseline off of it, put it on there, and maybe take a graphite pencil and put our boundary lines so that when we put our flat blank on there and slump it, we'll know about where we want it to land. So this has got to dry. This won't take anywhere near as long to dry as it did with the wet blanket. This will probably take an hour or two. You could accelerate that in the kiln and go to town and bend your blank. Is ready so we can make our pattern and cut our blank. This process of making the pattern is simply to put a piece of newspaper on the mold and stick the glass on there and draw a line. And first thing I do is make sure I know which side's the top, and in case I have to use it again in a week or two, I put the grain direction and the color and the texture. Since it's opalescent glass, which is milky glass, we have to cut the pattern out. If it was just clear window glass, you could just lay the pattern down on the glass, on the table rather, and cut the clear glass to the line. Once again, we're going to cut it about 1/8 of an inch short to compensate for the fact that the paper pattern was draped over the front of the glass. quite dramatic. Just a note here, how the mixing or lack of, this is a 3-color opal, lime, amber, white, and we're going to try to sneak this piece in here. This this blank is mostly lime on the front, but if you turn it over, it's kind of got a little bit of mixture of both. And then it looks different in the light as well. So I'm going to cut it a little bigger. Cut our interior curve first so we don't lose our points. Okay, so we've got our blank. Once again, we just take some of these sharp edges off a little bit. And we're going to put some reference lines. So we'll clean this, avoid getting our fingerprints on it, and we'll stick it in the kiln. Okay, so there it is. We'll probably put this at the similar firing of 1125 Fahrenheit with a ramping up time of 500 degrees per hour, and I think it's on like a 10-minute soak, and at that point it shuts itself down and cools real slowly. So we'll check it out after it's done. So it's the following day, it's down to room temperature, and here it is. Looks like we've got a good piece of bent glass. It's all ready to go. Now, if you're sizing these panels, the one that's underneath, the underneath side will appear as if it's 1/8 of an inch longer. And if you switch them all out, pretty much, it's going to be pretty close. The bottom one's going to be 1/8 of an inch further along than the top one. So don't make the mistake of putting the new panel on and grinding it too much. And then you can always resort to a flexible, like 1/4-inch tape measure to measure the length, and then make sure you're, this is actually, we got to take a 1/16 off of the new one, which is not a problem with all the grinding equipment that's out there. So that's a successful glass slumping project with a ceramic fiber mold. So we're going to do our final mold with a plaster fill. Actually, it's a plaster silica flour fill. And once again, this is kind of contingent on the fact that you may or may not have some metal that's close to the contour of the bend. This is a double bend. It bends top to bottom, left to right. Put some reference. This is soapstone, and this metal, it's just steel. There are holes in it because this is like a production mold back in the day, and they drilled the holes in the steel to allow the hot air to escape, so that when the glass was slumping, the hot air didn't hold the glass up and prevent it from slumping down all the way. So, but since we need to fill the mold with a fill, we're going to tape up the holes so that the plaster slurry doesn't end up going through the holes. So with this, let's see what happened. Okay, back to this. So whenever you're working with the silica flour and the plaster, it's advised to wear a mask. Once it's wet, it's not a big concern. So how are we going to determine how much to make? It's always a good question. When you're just making one as opposed to multiple different shapes, you probably want to, make more than you really need so you don't end up short. So I think we'll cup and a quarter. The proportions on this, I found to use 1 part water and about 1.5 parts silica flour plaster mix. There's some folks that do 1-to-1, but then you're hanging out for a long time waiting for the thing to gel up enough so that you can create a coverage on the mold where you can squish this into it and allow it to be where it has to be to fill the void. So we're going to go with this was a 1.25 cup of water, so we're going to go with well, let's check it out and see what happens here. One. Okay. So instead of the Vaseline on this, now that this is wet, I'm not too concerned about the dust. We're not going to use the Vaseline. We're going to just use a Murphy's oil soap as a release. and it's a little easier to clean up, and the Vaseline actually burns off and kind of a little unpleasant. This is much friendlier. That's Murphy's oil, so now these molds are basically temporary molds. Although this looks really familiar, they're all a little different, it seems. So when this is done, when this project is done, I'm just going to take this with the dried slurry and I'm just going to scrape it out, and it's going to go back on the shelf clean like this and wait till I need it again. There's probably 600 or 700 molds in my inventory, and this one's the closest for this, so this is why I grabbed it. Back in the day, these things were all blacksmithed out from a flat piece of steel. Somebody pounded these things, but if they went to that much trouble, this was a production item and not one-of-one. So we're just doing, actually, I think I'm making 4 of these. Object in there. Okay. That rumbling noise is my dog chewing her bone up in the living room. So, yeah, you want to catch this where it's just kind of stiffening up, but not too stiff, where you have to press the glass so hard you crack the glass. So, and in this case, less is not more. You're better off with more, because if you have a void, you can fill it later, it's not a problem, but it's really a whole lot easier if there's enough of this slurry in there to create a really smooth, nice mold. Okay. Okay, I know it looks a little messy, but it's okay. Okay. Okay, so we're not going to get too carried away right this minute, because if we pull too much away, sometimes it creates a void, and that's the last thing you want, especially when you have excess to begin with. So you don't want to make matters more difficult. Okay, let's just let it set up here without too much. So. If you have excess, you can, which there really isn't much here, I don't even know if it's enough, but you can make a kind of like a hockey puck of plaster and carve something on it, and then slump some glass into the kind of the decorated. So I coated it with a release, so it should come out. You most likely want that to be thicker. Oh, here we go. So this thing, once it dries, it'll pop out on this side or the underneath side. You can take a tool while this is still damp but hard and carve anything in there you want, like a rosette or you name it, and then put a flat piece of glass over it and slump it in the kiln, and it'll pick up the texture of that. It's just something to kind of make use of the excess plaster. It's very challenging to try to get the exact amount. It's possible, but more often than not, you either end up with too little or too much. Okay. yeah, the idea is to catch this plaster while you don't want it to get rock hard and dry, because then you won't be able to do what I'm doing. So, but you don't want to start doing this while it's still sloppy wet. So you want to expose the wall of the glass all the way around so the plaster's not holding it in. Okay. Okay. So this little void here is not a big concern. I mean, you could fill it. There's just a little bit of kind of surface texture here. I'm not concerned about it. We're not going to get the glass so hot that it's molten. It's just soft, and it's just going to slump down in. So it's not going to pick up any of this various type of texture. This is not a problem. I have made these where they've been perfect, you know, but there's so many variables beyond belief that you can't fully understand why it turns out exactly the way it does. But this is suitable mold. It's going to work fine for the 4 duplicates we need to make. So we're going to put this in the kiln and dry it with a ramp's rate of 300 degrees per hour up till 750, and maybe hold it for 20 minutes and let it just cool. So usually I do that at the end of the day after I've made the molds, and you know, the next day I'll pull them out. They're dry, they're cool, and they're ready to use. So here we have the dried mold, all cool, ready to make a pattern of the glass master, the panel that we're trying to duplicate. And before we forget, which I often do, I'm just going to quickly put my reference marks with a if you can get a 6B pencil, go for it. This is a 4B. It's a real soft graphite, and it doesn't dig into the plaster too much. So I put these arrows on. I'll be bending this panel most likely in the gas kiln, and at that point I have the ability to take it and pull it out of the kiln, not pull it out in my bare hands, but take the shelf that's on casters, pull it out, make the adjustment if it didn't fall 100% correctly, and then roll it back in and heat it up again. So first things first, we've got to get our blank. And top, grain direction, and the color and the texture. Because sometimes what will happen is you'll make one of these and maybe the customer will pick it up, drive 200 miles, and then the dog will pull the lamp down again. And you know, if you kept the pattern, if the dog did the bad deed of breaking the lamp, you'd be surprised how many dogs break lamps. But you'd have the pattern. This, like I mentioned, usually about 2 or 3 weeks after the job is gone, I'll scrape this out and just put the mold back up on the shelf. I won't save it with the plaster in it because it's just gonna get to be a big mess. And it's, more often than not, like this shape, I have maybe 10 or 12 similar ones stacked and nested in each other. So I've got 10 or 12 that are similar to this. And this one was the closest one. Try to get the closest one, so I not using a lot of the plaster compound. And cut it 1/8 of an inch shy. Okay, this is a symmetrical pattern, and panel rather, so you'll probably want to just fold it in half and make sure you're within a 1/16 or something, because if it's radically off, the pattern's not a good pattern. Because back in the day when they made these patterns were symmetrical, and this is probably a 6-panel shade, and they're all the same, that go into the lamp shade. So it's nice to take the sharp edge off of these, because if you do have to move it around a little, the sharp edge won't bite into the plaster rather. This is a quick, easy bench process. A lot of folks, including myself, have motorized water-cooled equipment, but just for the sake of simplicity, just keep it all right here. bit more in the way of kiln furniture. Okay. So this is a gas kiln that's been around since the 70s. It's designed to bend 4 panels at once because there's 4 jets at the top. We're just to keep things simple, we're just going to work on the one that we made this mold for. So pretty much want to level it so you don't want it, like, you know, off kilter too much. It's always nice to take the blank before you start warming the kiln up, and making sure that it's kind of oriented the right way. So this is about how we want it to be. So the way this is done, this is a really pretty quick process. I preheat the kiln, pull the drawer out, put the piece of glass on the warm mold, roll it back in, and bump the heat up again. And it's very quick. This gas kiln will bend the glass in less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and get the thing lit. So we lit all 4 burners. And I'll basically call for heat. So in a few minutes, this thing will be ramped up to like 1100 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And like I said, I'll probably lower the demand for heat, pull the drawer out, and put my blank on it. So there's some of the previous panels that were made in the kiln prior to right now. Those are all cool. And like I said, I usually bend around 4 at a time. It's a little more hectic than bending 1 at a time, but for right now, we'll just do this 1 panel. One thing you want to keep in mind is to make sure you put the panel, the face side down. Sometimes you get confused and you just throw it in there, and then you find out you bent the wrong side face forward. So there is such a thing as bending it too fast. Well, and this is a situation where it bent too fast, where these tips got pushed up too quickly because it slumped so fast. If you slump it slower, this wouldn't have happened, but for whatever reason, it got going too fast, too quickly. That's the back side. I don't think it's going to be a problem in the light fixture. So, but I'm not that excited about that feature. So we're going to kind of bring it up to temperature a little slower than maybe normal. This pattern is different than that. That doesn't have points at the very far extreme to lift up, so I think we're okay. So this being gas, and the other one, the other kilns are electric. The electric is a slower, more intense heat, and the gas is quicker, and we go hotter, overall hotter with the gas. When I say slower, I mean this is still radically quicker than an electric kiln. So we'll probably need to bring this thing up to like 1200, which might be equivalent to like 1120 in the electric kiln. The heat is escaping through the top. There's a whole different kind of configuration with a gas kiln, so we go a little hotter. So when it's around 1180, I'm going to pull it out, make any adjustment, roll it back in, bring it up to temperature so it can conform to the adjustment that I made on where it's falling, and then at that point we can put it into low fire and let it cool down slowly. Handle is centered inside those little angles that we drew when we made the pattern. And we'll bring this thing up to 1200, and I'm confident we don't need to look at it again. We'll know that it's slumped properly, and we'll, like I said, we'll let it cool slowly, and go from there. I'll bend another one tomorrow. But here it is, we're done.